Hello, thank you so much for the invitation, and I want to start off by saying that I cannot claim the authorship of this wonderful executive summary of my work here. I sent in an abstract of about 98 words, and my paper currently has 17 pages, so whoever did this wonderful executive summary of my paper, I owe you a handshake and a very strong drink tonight, so thank you. But yeah, getting back to the serious stuff, I am not an archivist. I love using archives. Sometimes I use them very badly, like Monsieur Roger Nogaret can attest to. When I visited him in Paris at the BNP Paribas, I made such a mess. He told me to stay behind and vacuum the archives for half an hour. And I did do that, and I gave him a big box of Swiss chocolates. So I hope he's taken on my apology. But I deal with a very different environment, a very different and politically contested archival environment in South Africa, and there are a number of reasons for that. As much as South Africa is contested at the moment, its past is a totally different genre of history. And the period I deal with, 1880 to 1910, is basically the making of the modern South African economy. I mean, modern is used here extremely loosely, but dealing with a small agricultural, mostly settler economy, but then there were obviously huge pockets of peasantry. This Boer Republic of the Transvaal is suddenly faced by a mineral revolution which contributed to a real financial revolution, which my extensive research is based on. So the development of gold mining in South Africa, some claim that diamonds ushered in this already, really changed the financial experience in South Africa, and the financial intermediaries that mushroomed up in the next years have provided historians with wonderful documentation, and I believe this documentation has been totally neglected by scholars in the north and in the west. I have captured this comparative advantage, but I encourage you to look at these archives and find your own links and connections. So, just to put this onto a map, what we're dealing with here, the Cape Colony, Natal, these were obviously British territories, these were British settler societies. I mean, they were not dominions as such by then, and the Orange Free State and the Transvaal, which were two independent settler republics with their own constitution. Although their sovereignty was controlled to some degree by the British Crown, these were independent territories. And the fact that these independent territories had their own constitution, they had their own commercial laws, makes this for a unique study of frontier capitalism in a non-European society. The archives and politics of this that have emerged in the last couple of years, and more specifically after 1994, South African archives particularly, I mean, Anne Stoller always refers to going beyond and against this archival grain. South African archives are worth of scrutiny on their own. I mean, this is a fact nobody would like to dispute. But my archives, the ones I deal with, come from a period when Britain's colonial and the South African Republic's government, financial and economic institutions were geared to the exploitation of Africa's resources and people. So it's very important to look at these past scenarios. In many ways, there are aspects of economic apartheid that continue into South Africa until this day, and it's very important to deconstruct these ideological nuances in all the archives. So this is a very short review of what is available in Johannesburg, and what I am very familiar with and what I work with extensively. So for me, the most important collection of archives was the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. Archives, I would not define that as archives. I think these were just boxes of minutes and ledgers and file submissions. And I spent 2 weeks reorganizing these boxes, and then 8,000 photographs later, I started studying them. And I'd really like you to consider the JSE for a while. I mean, I found the JSE, its papers during the high era of financial globalization absolutely fascinating. The way that a so-called peripheral stock exchange had formal relations with London, with Paris, with Hamburg, with a number of stock exchanges in Australia. And you see this complex story of brokers who are traveling beyond imperial lines using new technologies, and where brokers and speculators who have lost creditworthiness in London are traveling through Johannesburg and on their way to Melbourne, as one case I documented. It is also fascinating how Britain did not want South Africa to capture its own securities. What I mean by that is that Sir Henry Burdett was extremely active in writing numerous letters from the LSE to the JSE, instructing how regulation should be improved, how regulation should be laxed in some cases. But more importantly, he was very scared of South African brokers coming back to London and using their art of the puff inside the LSE. So, what are we doing here for time? The second archive, which I found extremely fruitful, was the Standard Bank of South Africa, not to be confused with the Standard and Chartered Bank, which was active in Hong Kong, still is. But the archives there are unique in the sense that they present us a real colonial network of banks in sub-Saharan Africa. So we've got a collection of banks and a collection of inspection reports from banks going all the way from the Zambezi down to the Cape. And these banks, as opposed to the stock exchanges in London, the banks were extremely active in getting this Johannesburg Stock Exchange underway. Bank managers were allowed to become members of a stock exchange, and banks had particular intelligence needs within the stock exchange. And we can see a number of unique information production cycles that evolved out of the stock exchange floor. So what I used to investigate the so-called microstructures of the exchange was the Johannesburg Consolidated Estate Archive, which is based in the Houghton Estate, which is very familiar to those who study diamonds and Oppenheimers. But the estate archives show us how the landlord of a stock exchange operates. How does the landlord not only maintain the market, but maintain the physical structures around the market, be it the actual stock exchange building, be it the adjacent offices, be it even newspaper offices. The stock exchange had such close relations with newspapers. Much of my work focuses on financial information production, but that's a topic for Boston in August. So here's just a quick photo of the archives. This is after I put everything together and after I vacuumed the floor like Monsieur Roger would have instructed me to. And the conclusions. So 1880 to 1910, period of great social and economic unrest and transition in Southern Africa. The archives provide new insight into the local, regional, and global contexts of development in Southern Africa's financial system during the first age of financial globalization, and it presents new evidence on the early history of Africa's oldest existing and functioning stock exchange. And not to be underrated, the JSE is, I think, the 7th most capitalized stock exchange in the world, so not to be overlooked. Thank you so much.